The sun was warm, the sky was bright, and the smell of grilled meat floated through the small community park. It was the kind of busy weekend afternoon that made people smile without any reason. Music played from a small speaker, not too loud, and children ran around chasing each other with paper plates in their hands. A group of neighbors were gathered together, laughing and enjoying a barbecue. It felt more like an overdue break from long days and endless work. At the center of the gathering stood a man named Daniel. He had spent the whole morning preparing food, seasoning ribs, marinating chicken, and shaping patties like he was having fun with clay. Cooking always calmed him, but today felt even more special. He wasn't celebrating anything big like a birthday or wedding. He simply wanted to thank the people around him for welcoming him into the neighborhood and supporting him when he had recently struggled to find work. Now that he finally had a steady job at a repair shop, he felt lighter, free from constant stress, and he believed a meal could express gratitude better than words. His friends watched him flip meat on the grill, smiling at his excitement. He was not the loudest person, not someone who stood out in a crowd, but he cared about small things. He noticed when someone needed help, he remembered kind gestures, and he believed in returning them without waiting for a reason. And today felt like the perfect day to do it. The laughter around him made him grin without trying. Someone called his name and handed him a plate. He wiped his hands on his apron and served the first piece of chicken to an elderly woman who lived 2 houses away from him. She gave him a slow smile, the kind only older folks give when they see a young person doing something good. To Daniel, that smile felt like an award. Nearby, 2 boys argued about whose turn it was to hold the tongs while their mother shook her head, trying not to laugh at their determination to pretend they were grill masters. A group of teenagers sat on the grass eating burgers and comparing which sauce tasted better, acting like judges in a food contest. It was chaos, but it was happy chaos, the kind that felt easy to live in. The music wasn't too loud, or it was upbeat enough to give energy to the moment. Nobody paid attention to time, and nobody cared about the usual daily troubles. They were living fully inside that simple afternoon. But a few blocks away, someone did not share their joy. A man who lived next to the park stood by his window, frowning at the gathering. Every time the wind changed direction, he caught the smell of grilled food. And instead of enjoying it, he closed his window angrily. The laughter bothered him, the music rubbed him the wrong way, and the smoke from the grill felt like an unwelcome visitor. He had complained about noises from the park before, and today, he picked up his phone and called the police. Inside the park, Daniel had no idea that someone was upset. He was busy checking the ribs, adjusting the heat, and making sure everything cooked evenly. His friend teased him about acting like he was on a cooking show. Daniel laughed, pretending to hold an invisible microphone as if he was recording a tutorial. Then the mood shifted suddenly. A marked police car rolled to a slow stop near the park entrance. The sound of the door opening made several heads turn. Children stopped moving and adults stared quietly as a uniformed officer stepped out. He walked calmly toward the group, his expression firm, not angry, but serious enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Some people whispered to each other, unsure who had done something wrong. Daniel looked around, trying to guess if someone had accidentally caused trouble. He wiped his hands on his apron again, suddenly nervous. Though he couldn't think of any reason to be, the officer approached them with his shoulders straight and his voice steady. He explained that a complaint had been made about loud music and smoke coming from the grill. He said the gathering did not appear to have a permit and that it needed to end immediately. Daniel felt confused. He had never heard about needing a permit for a small neighborhood barbecue. The people around him looked at each other, just as uncertain. The officer wasn't yelling, but his tone left no space for discussion. Without waiting for questions, he began pointing to the speakers and the tables, instructing them to pack up. A quiet disappointment fell over the group. The teenagers on the grass sighed in frustration. The boys who had been fighting over the tongs looked like someone had taken their favorite toy. The elderly woman's smile faded into a thin line, and the smell of grilled food suddenly felt heavy, like it carried trouble instead of comfort. Daniel finally gathered the courage to speak. He approached the officer politely, not wanting to sound rude. He explained that it was a simple, friendly gathering, that they weren't selling anything, and that the music wasn't loud. He tried to make it clear that they meant no harm. The officer listened, but did not change his expression. He repeated the rules, saying that the complaint left him no choice. He seemed tense, like he had been dealing with similar situations for too long. There was something tired in his eyes. His job was to follow orders, but it looked like he didn't enjoy being the person who ruined people's good moments. Daniel didn't argue aggressively. He didn't raise his voice or act disrespectful. He simply asked questions, trying to understand why the officer was so strict. The officer paused, as if deciding whether to explain more or stick strictly to the rules. His hand rested on his belt, not in a threatening way, but in a nervous habit. He looked around at the families, at the food that was half-cooked, at the children who stared at him like he had taken their fun away. The air felt different now, heavy and uncertain, as if the afternoon sun had lost some of its warmth. People weren't laughing anymore, and Daniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had planned this day to bring people closer, to celebrate simple kindness. And now it was crumbling before his eyes, not because of anything harmful, but because someone disliked joy near their window. He looked at the officer again, searching his face for a sign of understanding, hoping the situation could change. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would lead to something none of them expected. The barbecue wasn't just about food anymore. It was about connection, misunderstanding, and something surprising about to happen. Daniel felt the officer's silence stretching longer than it should. It wasn't the silent type that waits for someone to argue, but more like a pause from a person who didn't truly want to be doing what he was doing. The officer cleared his throat, as if preparing himself to repeat the same instructions again. But Daniel gently spoke first, still trying to be respectful. He asked quietly, "Sir, can I just understand what the rule is? We're not selling food, we're just having a meal together. If we need to lower the music, we can do that." He wasn't trying to negotiate like someone fighting a ticket. He genuinely wanted clarity. The officer looked at him, slightly surprised by the calm tone. Many people got defensive when approached by police. Some argued loudly, others complained angrily. But Daniel was neither. He sounded more confused than offended. The officer sighed and finally spoke, his voice softer than before. He explained that they had received several steady complaints from the same neighbor for months. Every time there was noise from the park, even if it was normal, he had to respond. And if he didn't act firmly, the neighbor would go above him and pressure his department. Now, his own supervisor expected him to take strict action whenever that person called. It was not simply about rules. It was about pressure. Daniel listened carefully, noticing something uneasy in the officer's expression. Something tired. It wasn't anger. It was weariness. The officer looked like someone who woke up thinking about problems that were not his. He looked like someone who had been blamed too, many times for just trying to follow instructions. Daniel didn't know what to say for a moment. He had never thought about the stress behind a badge. To him, police were supposed to be confident, sure of their decisions, firm. But this man looked like he was walking on eggshells every day. He was cautious with every move. Meanwhile, the other neighbors began packing plates, even though no one had been directly told to do so. People always assumed the worst when authority stepped in. Parents started reminding their kids to pick up their trash quickly. A few adults whispered, trying to guess which neighbor could be so bothered by a simple barbecue. The mood felt shaky. Not explosive, but fragile. It's like one wrong word could break it completely. One of the teenagers rolled his eyes and muttered, "Who complains about food and laughter?" An older man shushed him, saying that arguing wouldn't solve anything. The teenager turned away, but didn't speak again. No one wanted to make the situation worse. Daniel decided to respond again. He asked the officer if it was possible for them to continue the barbecue quietly. No loud music, no shouting, just food and conversation. The officer looked uncertain. He knew the rules well, but this wasn't exactly a rule issue. He was stuck between fairness and expectation. He was caught in the tension of keeping peace with one unhappy neighbor and the entire park. He glanced at the quiet children still holding plates, waiting for someone to tell them if they should go home or stay. He noticed the elderly woman sitting patiently, her plate untouched, as if even chewing might be too loud now. The scene didn't look like trouble. It looked like a moment interrupted. Before answering, The officer's attention shifted suddenly. He smelled the air and looked at the grill. Smoke had started to rise thicker than usual. He frowned and stepped closer. Daniel followed him, and they reached the grill at the same time. A bit of sauce had dripped into the coals, causing a flare-up in smoke that looked bigger than it truly was. The officer leaned in slightly, his instincts kicking in. He seemed ready to think it was dangerous, but Daniel laughed softly. He grabbed a water bottle, twisted off the cap, and sprinkled just enough to calm the fire without putting it out completely. It hissed lightly, and the thick smoke eased. Daniel chuckled and joked that his sauce was too excited to participate in the barbecue. The officer's serious face twitched, almost into a smile, but he tried to hide it. It was clear he didn't want to break his strict posture, especially while on duty. But the moment cracked the tension just a little. Standing next to the grill, the officer noticed something else. The food smelled incredible. Barbecue sauce mixed with grilled spices made a warm, rich smell that clung to the air. It wasn't heavy like smoke from burning wood. It smelled like comfort. Daniel could see the officer noticing the scent. For a moment, the officer seemed like a regular man, not someone who carried authority or pressure. He looked like someone who had just remembered being a kid at a picnic or being invited to a neighbor's cookout long ago. His shoulders relaxed slightly without him realizing. Daniel decided to take a small step. He lifted a piece of chicken with tongs, waved away the remaining smoke, said quietly, not dramatically, not like a bribe, but like a simple gesture before we shut anything down. "Do you want to try this? At least taste what you're stopping." A few nearby adults froze. Some gasped softly, worried Daniel had crossed a line. But he hadn't. There was nothing disrespectful in his tone. It was more like a neighbor sharing part of a moment. The officer stared at the chicken, as if unsure whether he was allowed to say yes. He looked back at Daniel, then at the group behind him, waiting for his decision. The smell lingered warmly, pushing patience into the air. He thought for a few seconds that felt long enough to be a minute. Then, almost unexpectedly, he nodded a tiny nod, like he was afraid to admit it too clearly. Daniel placed the piece gently on a small, clean plate. The officer didn't remove his gloves. Instead, he carefully took the piece with a napkin. A bite, one small bite, was all he took. Everyone waited. They didn't even breathe loudly. And then something very small happened. His face softened. His eyebrows relaxed. His eyes blinked slower. He swallowed the bite like it released something heavy in him. For the first time that day, Daniel saw the officer's human side, not behind rules, not behind duty, but behind taste and memory. Something inside the officer shifted, not dramatically. It's not loudly, but quietly, like a door unlocking somewhere deep. The barbecue wasn't saved yet. Nothing was solved. They were still at a crossroads. But something had changed in that minute without any arguments. Something had begun, and no one realized how important that small change would become. The officer stood quietly after taking that single bite, as if he needed a moment to process more than just the taste. The families around him began whispering to one another. Some thought the situation would turn back to strict orders any second, while others hoped that tiny bite of chicken had bought them a chance. No one dared speak too loudly. The barbecue felt like a paused movie, waiting for the next scene to play. Daniel didn't push him. He didn't offer more food or try to change his mind with jokes. He simply stepped back from the grill and let the officer think, respecting the moment. The only sound in the park came from crackling coals and soft rustling of leaves in the trees. Slowly, the officer cleared his throat again. He didn't put on a smile or show any big reaction. He only said, "That's actually really good." It wasn't a joke or a compliment for the sake of being polite. It was honest. And because it was honest, it mattered. Daniel gave a modest smile, the kind that only lifted the corners of his mouth. The teenagers relaxed their shoulders. The boys who had been fighting over the tongs grinned again. Even the elderly woman finally picked up her fork, sensing the change in atmosphere. The officer wasn't joking, but his tone had softened. Just a little dot. It was enough. Then something happened that neither Daniel nor the crowd expected. The officer leaned slightly over the grill again, as if checking whether the rest of the food looked as good as it smelled. He wasn't acting like a cop anymore, just a man intrigued by a meal. He took another, quicker look at the ribs. Daniel noticed and chuckled softly. "It's okay if you want another taste," he said. He still wasn't trying to persuade the officer to change his decision. It felt more like offering a neighbor a piece of barbecue before saying goodbye. A simple gesture, nothing more. The officer hesitated, then shook his head, more out of embarrassment than refusal. But he kept his eyes on the grill, and that was enough to show that he wanted to say yes more than he wanted to pretend he did. Daniel didn't insist. Instead, he picked up the ribs and flipped them carefully. The sound of sizzling sauce returned, slow and sticky, spreading its aroma around the park again. For a moment, the barbecue smelled like home. Not just food, but home. The officer stood silently watching him. He didn't look like someone asked to shut anything down. He looked like someone remembering something. Maybe a backyard moment. Maybe family. Maybe a cookout he hadn't been to in a long time. There was a quiet nostalgia on his face. Finally, he spoke again, this time with uncertainty instead of authority. "You said this is just a small gathering?" Daniel nodded. "Just neighbors. No business. No crowds. We keep music low. We don't make a mess." He didn't sound defensive. He sounded sincere, and the sincerity was hard to ignore. The officer looked back toward the tables, slowly scanning each person as if confirming Daniel's words. The families weren't loud. The teens weren't causing trouble. Even the kids were sticking close to their parents instead of running wild. It wasn't a rowdy party. It was just community. He looked toward the street where the complaint might have come from, and looked back at Daniel, almost caught between two sides. He was still holding on to the rules, but they didn't fit this situation as tightly as the caller wanted them to. Before he could speak, a voice came from behind one of the mothers. She walked up politely and said, "We can turn off the speaker if it helps." She wasn't asking permission. She wasn't begging. She was offering a solution, and that made a difference. The offer took pressure off the officer, giving him a way out without breaking rules. Daniel nodded in agreement. "We can make it quieter. No music at all if needed. We just wanted to share food." Officer looked at the grill again. The decision seemed to sit right there among the ribs, sizzling like it was waiting to be chosen. He rubbed his thumb against the edge of his glove, a small habit that showed he was thinking carefully. After a long breath, he spoke more gently. "All right, let me check something in my car." He didn't sound threatening or final. It sounded like he was willing to consider a different outcome. Daniel let him go without asking anything else. No one followed him, no one cheered, no one clapped. Everyone just waited, unsure but hopeful. While the officer walked back to his patrol car, Daniel focused on the food, flipping the ribs slowly and brushing more sauce over them. He wasn't smiling like someone who thought he had won anything. He was calm, steady, patient, a quiet kind of patience that felt respectful, not desperate. A few feet away, the teenagers whispered about how strange but interesting the situation was. The little boys argued again, but this time about how to make the grill smoke taste better, clearly pretending they understood cooking science. The elderly woman finally took a bite of her food and seemed relieved to taste it instead of watch it cooling on her plate for no reason. When the officer returned, he wasn't holding a citation pad like before. He didn't look tense. He didn't look like someone forced to be strict. Instead, he looked thoughtful. It's like someone who realized there was a difference between enforcing rules blindly and understanding what fairness meant. He stood near Daniel again. Not too close, but not distant either. "Let's just keep everything quiet," he said. "No loud music, no extra people joining in, and make sure everything is cleaned properly after." The crowd didn't cheer, but there was a visible wave of relief. Parents nodded respectfully. Teenagers smiled but kept quiet. The elderly woman pressed her lips together in agreement, showing gratitude without words. Daniel nodded firmly. "Thank you. We'll make sure of it." The officer didn't leave immediately. He lingered for a moment, and his eyes drifted back to the grill again. But this time, instead of saying anything, he just gave Daniel a look that quietly said he wouldn't mind one more bite later. A look filled with curiosity, not authority. It was small. It was subtle. But it was the beginning of something neither of them expected. It was a moment where rules met humanity, and humanity won gently. Nothing more was said. But something had shifted forever. The barbecue slowly picked up life again, but not in the same loud, bubbly way it started. This time, everything felt calmer, more careful but also strangely meaningful. Conversations were softer, laughter lighter, and even the children tried not to shout too loudly. It wasn't fear that changed the mood. It was respect. Everyone understood what could have happened if the situation had gone differently. Daniel lowered the speaker volume until the music was just a gentle background hum, more like a heartbeat than a party. He checked the grill once more, carefully brushing the ribs as though he were protecting them from trouble. The aroma lifted again, but not in strong, smoky bursts, just warm and inviting. Like a slow memory, the officer remained nearby, watching them quietly. He didn't stand like someone guarding them, nor like someone looking for mistakes. He simply observed, as if trying to understand the group beyond the complaint that brought him there. Families didn't ignore him. They nodded politely when their eyes met his, and he returned the greeting with small nods of his own. At one point, a little girl walked near him holding a small cupcake with bright sprinkles. She stared up at him, not scared, just curious. Her mother rushed toward her, thinking she'd bothered him. But the officer gently shook his head and waved off the apology. Without speaking, he crouched slightly so he could meet the little girl's eye level. She stretched out her hand, offering the cupcake to him. He didn't take it, not yet, but the moment softened, something more than just his expression. It softened his presence. The mother quietly thanked him for being kind with her daughter. The officer simply nodded, uncomfortable with praise but clearly moved. He wasn't used to being treated like a person with feelings. Most people saw the uniform first, and only the uniform. When he stood up again, he noticed Daniel looking at him while brushing sauce over the ribs. It wasn't a stare of judgment or curiosity. It was just a simple human look. The kind someone gives when they recognize effort. Their eyes met briefly, and the officer cleared his throat, almost embarrassed. He tried to look serious again, but it wasn't very convincing anymore. This time, it looked like he was pretending to be stern, not actually feeling it. Daniel noticed, but didn't tease him. Instead, he picked up a small rib, cut it cleanly into a piece, and placed it on a fresh plate. He didn't call the officer over or wave it in front of him like bait. He just set it on the corner of the table where anyone could take it. The officer noticed. He hesitated, like a man lost between duty and appetite. Finally, after what felt like a long internal debate, he slowly walked toward the table. He didn't reach quickly for the plate. He glanced around first, making sure no one was watching too closely, though everyone absolutely was. Then, as if he were doing something extremely delicate, picked up the plate. He took one bite again, just one, like earlier, but the response on his face came faster this time. He didn't hide the enjoyment. His eyebrows lifted slightly, his shoulders loosened, and he almost smiled. Almost. But almost was enough for everyone to feel it. A teen whispered loudly, "He likes it," and immediately received a tap on the shoulder from his mother to keep quiet. The officer looked their way, but instead of frowning, he looked amused for a second. Only a second, but it was there. Daniel returned to the grill while pretending not to watch. But the officer turned toward him and said, "It's really good, you know." His tone wasn't official. It was just honest. Daniel simply replied, "Thank you. I'm glad you like it." It was the most ordinary exchange in the world, but it felt bigger than the situation that started it. Two men talking with no tension, no rules hanging between them. After a while, the officer finally stepped away, taking a slow walk around the park. He looked not at the barbecue anymore, but at the neighborhood itself. People sitting together, children playing softly, everyone respecting the space. It dawned on him that shutting this down would have done nothing but create distance and resentment. Letting it continue created connection, peace, and even gratitude. He realized he could choose which result he wanted his actions to create. When he walked back, he stopped near Daniel again, not close enough to get in his way, but close enough to say something without raising his voice. "Everything seems fine as long as you keep it quiet," he repeated, but this time his voice carried a gentle tone. As if the rule was no longer a threat, but a simple agreement. Daniel nodded once more. We'll keep it respectful. The officer looked at the grill one last time and added, slightly awkward, don't let the ribs burn. Daniel chuckled lightly. I won't, I promise. Those simple words felt like a handshake then. Something unexpected happened. The officer pulled out his wallet knot to write a citation. Not to show his badge, but to show Daniel a small card. It had a number on it. If anyone gives you trouble or calls about this again, let me know. I'll make sure it's handled fairly. Daniel accepted the card, not excitedly, but respectfully, the same way someone accepts a meaningful handshake. I appreciate that. It wasn't just a phone number. It was protection. It was trust. The officer then gave a small nod to the group, but before leaving, he paused. His eyes drifted toward the grill once again. Daniel saw the hesitation. Without a word, Daniel wrapped a small plate with foil and handed it to him. The officer took it quietly, not smiling. But with a look that said something real had happened today, he left not as an authority shutting down a gathering, but as a man who had been welcomed. The barbecue continued with care, not because they feared consequences, but because they respected the small understanding that had just been formed. People ate, laughed softly, and kept the park clean. The sun dipped lower in the sky, turning everything golden. Nobody expected that a complaint would lead to something like this. Nobody imagined that a police visit would end with a shared meal and a bond. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was the beginning of change. The officer's patrol car rolled slowly down the street until it turned out of sight. Even after he left, the air still felt different, calmer, but filled with a strange excitement that was quiet, not loud. The families returned to eating, but now they talked more softly, as if they had witnessed something important. Kids didn't fully understand, yet even they felt it. Something fair had happened, and fairness always leaves a warm feeling behind. Daniel continued serving food, but people treated him differently now. Some came up just to thank him, others patted him gently on the back, or complimented him more than before. It wasn't because of the food only. It was because he handled the situation with patience instead of anger. He didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't embarrass anyone. He simply tried to understand and be understood. One of the teenagers walked up to the grill with a shy smile and said, "That was pretty cool. Could have yelled at him, but you didn't." Daniel laughed lightly and replied, yelling, "Never cooks anything better." The teen nodded, pretending to understand deeply, even though he was more impressed by how the officer kept eating the ribs as the sun began to sink lower. Turning clouds orange and pink, Daniel started packing up slowly. He didn't rush, but he didn't take advantage of the officer's kindness either. He wanted to show respect, not victory. Parents helped fold tables, kids collected paper plates from the grass, and even people who had arrived late pitched in to gather cups. It wasn't because anyone told them to. It was because the barbecue suddenly felt like something they all owned. When everything was almost cleaned, the elderly woman approached Daniel. She held a small, empty plate and looked at him with gentle eyes. "You handled that well," she said. It takes strength to stay calm when someone tries to ruin a happy moment. Daniel nodded slightly, unsure what to say. She continued, "Sometimes kindness is louder than arguing." She patted his arm and walked away, leaving him thinking about her words. By evening, the park looked spotless. The speaker was off, the grill was cooling down, and the tables were nearly empty. Daniel wrapped the last few leftovers to take home. Before leaving, he looked around and felt something meaningful like. The park was no longer just a space where people gathered, but a place where trust had grown. And not just among neighbors, but between strangers too. In the following days, life continued quietly. People went back to work, kids returned to school, and the park remained its usual peaceful place. But a few small changes began to show. One morning, Daniel checked his mailbox and found a handwritten note from a neighbor he barely knew. The note thanked him for the barbecue and for showing patience with the officer. It said his behavior reminded people in the neighborhood that not all problems needed anger to be solved. There was no name on the note, just a message and a small drawing of a grill with smoke rising like a little cloud. It made him smile. On another day, someone at the repair shop where he worked, dropped off a broken lawnmower and said they had heard about the barbecue story. They weren't there that day, but apparently the neighborhood had talked. They said, "You're the grill guy, right?" Daniel laughed and said he was just someone who cooked on weekends. The customer replied, "Well, keep doing it. We need more people like you." Daniel fixed their lawnmower for free without saying why. A week later, something unexpected happened. A different police car showed up near the park, not because of complaints, but because it was part of patrol duty. That officer was not the same one from the barbecue. He was younger and looked tougher, with a cold expression. He sat inside his car for a while, watching the park like someone waiting for trouble. Then Daniel saw a familiar vehicle driving slowly behind that car. The officer from the barbecue pulled up next to his fellow officer and parked. The younger officer stepped out, and they talked briefly. Daniel couldn't hear what they were saying, but he noticed the older officer point toward the park with a calm expression, not accusing anyone, just explaining something. The younger officer looked at the park again, this time not suspiciously, but with curiosity. After a short conversation, both officers left and not a single complaint was made. That moment meant something. It meant the officer didn't just eat ribs. He understood the neighborhood. He defended it quietly, protected fairness, not just rules. A few days later, the neighborhood planned another small gathering, not a barbecue, just a casual picnic. This time, they invited the officer. Not through a big party announcement, not through official messages, just a simple handwritten note delivered to his station. No one was sure if he would come. Most people didn't expect him to. But he did. He didn't come in uniform. Came in a plain shirt, looking slightly uncomfortable but trying not to show it. He walked toward the group like someone trying not to disturb anything. People greeted him naturally, not with excitement or formality. Someone handed him a plate. A kid offered him a cookie, and Daniel nodded at him from across the picnic blanket. It wasn't dramatic. It was just normal, and that was the point. He wasn't a guest of honor. It was just part of the neighborhood. He ate quietly, talked a little, and even laughed once when a little boy accidentally spilled juice on his shoe. Nothing big happened. Nothing had to happen. Being there was enough, as the sun set again. Painting the sky gold the same way it had the day of the barbecue, the officer walked up to Daniel with a relaxed smile. "Maybe next time," he said, "you can teach me how to make those ribs." Daniel smiled back and replied, "Only if you promise not to shut down my class." The officer laughed. Not a small chuckle, but a real laugh. And Daniel realized something. Sometimes change doesn't come from fighting, shouting, or proving someone wrong. Sometimes change comes from a plate of warm food, a calm voice, a little respect. The barbecue hadn't just fed the neighborhood, it fed a connection, and that connection would last longer than any meal.